Hey everyone, Avros here, back again with the Final Fantasy XII Game Challenge in Final Fantasy V, and back with the escape sequence here with Galuf. We've only got Galuf in our party right here at the start, so it does make this a bit more interesting, which is why we go to the save point there and make sure we save, as he needs to fight his way down to where Avros and company are being held in a jail cell. Except not the best at keeping people hostage. As you'll see, there's only a couple of floors here that Galuf needs to fight his way through on his own to get to them, and none of these enemies are particularly threatening to a single person. It especially helps that Galuf's got all these summons which will just one-shot everything here, so there's no point really talking about the combat. But yeah, all it took was him flying to the battlements. I mean, the main gate is obviously well guarded, but that's it. Fly to the battlements, make your way straight down to the third floor, and here's Gilgamesh, who was left behind by Exdeath to guard Avros and friends. And we'll talk more about Gilgamesh in a bit, but this first fight against him here is incredibly straightforward. Basically, he sits here in front of the jail cell and tries to take out Galuf with a few physical attacks, but Galuf's got the Elf Cape on here as his accessory slot, which the upside of that is that it does actually give him a dodge against all physical attacks, and all Gilgamesh does here is physical attacks, so I got really lucky in this fight. If you've been paying attention, notice Galuf hasn't taken any damage. He's still at 455 here since the start of this fight, and Gilgamesh keeps swinging, and Galuf, on an incredibly lucky streak, just keeps on dodging and throwing these Rama summons at him. And Gilgamesh decides, as I said, this is his first fight. He decides that he's going to tell us not to step out of line again and bail. He doesn't want to die. Galuf's here and basically lets everyone know he's going to free them. And they're all happy to see him. And Ross is like, you messed up, but Galuf's like, yeah, no time for this now. We're still in Exdeath's castle, you dumbass. Yeah, party's all back together. It immediately re-equips the rest of the party with their gear and jobs and everything there, which is handy. You don't have to go through messing around with your menus to fix everything back up. And escaping from the castle, they kind of do increase the pack sizes here, so you'll notice there's 4 tarantulas instead of 2. It's a way to try and make it so, you know, you don't get into this section with just Galuf and, you know, having not played the game before, not seeing it coming, end up in a lot of trouble. However, there's still just the one shell bear, and they're a pushover. Like, they're not even difficult, so yeah, a bit of looking here at some different gear we can put on Galuf, so giving him a Mage Masher there instead of his Thunder Rod he was using makes it so that all of his magic attacks get boosted instead of just Rama. By boosting his magic stats, that allows you some of the other summons, and Ross decides to vibrate his way along the floor there to not get spotted by the monsters that are locked up inside a cage themselves, which doesn't really make any sense to me. Go and use this Spring of Restoration again, and save again at the save point now with the full party, and still can't go any further into Exdeath's castle, so we just leave out the front door. So when I said it was guarded, I guess not either. It's just more that they would have seen him coming. And here we are at one of my favourite sections of the game. This is the big bridge, and the theme that's playing here in the background is the battle at the big bridge. You may not be able to hear it the best here with me talking over the top of it for the time being, so I'm going to stop for a moment so you can appreciate the majesty of this theme here. So, Battle at the Big Bridge is also known as Gilgamesh's theme, and has followed him to some of the other Final Fantasy games that he has shown up in. Gilgamesh is a bit of a recurring character along the lines of Sid and some of the other characters that do like Chop. Some of them are the summons and things like that. But Gilgamesh has shown up in a handful of games and has retroactively been added to some of like the GBA remakes of some of the games, and they've had them come out and all the rest of it. So Gilgamesh, as I said, we'd talk about him a bit more later on, and now's a good time. He'll come back up for combat a bit later on in this section. I'm being a bit self-indulgent here. He's one of my favourite Final Fantasy characters, and running this segment at normal speed while we go on the bridge to enjoy his theme and talk a bit about Gilgamesh, because he's an interesting character. So, Gilgamesh is the main character of an ancient Akkadian poem called the Epic of Gilgamesh. That's where the name comes from. He was a demigod with superhuman strength who built the walls of Uruk to defend his peoples and travels to meet the sage. Not even going to try and pronounce it, but to meet a great sage, and was a survivor of the Great Flood. They believe that he may have actually been a Sumerian king that ruled the city for a fairly long time back in the day. He is in the list of Sumerian kings as ruling the city of Uruk for 126 years, which is kind of insane. However, the Gilgamesh in Final Fantasy takes his name from the Epic of Gilgamesh, but not his sort of characterization. So Gilgamesh in Final Fantasy is based on the story of Benkei, a famous character in Japanese mythology and the chronicles of the Genpei War. He was a powerful warrior monk who was said to have defeated 200 men in every battle that he engaged in, and had the strength of demons. And pretty much his introduction in Japanese mythology is his goal to steal 1,000 weapons from everyone that he fought, that he took a weapon from, and decided the best way to do this would just be to stay at one of the bridges in Kyoto and challenge every warrior that attempted to cross the bridge until he had 1,000 weapons. He actually lost, apparently, according to legend, his 1,000th duel against Minamoto no Yoshitsune, and became his retainer throughout the rest of his life, fighting alongside him. From this story, Gilgamesh in Final Fantasy takes a few very interesting things. You'll notice in a second here when we go inside this building and fight Gilgamesh again, so he's been waiting behind that door the whole time, so like in the Benkei story, waiting on a bridge, also Battle at the Big Bridge being part of his theme, because he loves to duel people on bridges in the mythology. But you'll notice here that Gilgamesh's weapon he's holding is a naginata, a type of Japanese glaive, and that was apparently one of the favoured weapons of Benkei. We'll see later with Gilgamesh that he does also have some other weapons. Basically all those are taken from the Legend of Benkei as well. So the weapons are a axe, a rake, a sickle, a wooden mallet, a saw, an iron staff, and the naginata were the weapons favoured by Benkei. Gilgamesh, more on the side of swords as well as axes and a flail and some more traditional looking weapons when we actually see him using some of them. And part of his quest in this isn't necessarily to steal weapons from people he's defeated, but more to find a legendary weapon called Excalibur, which is a legendary sword, and we'll see what happens with that later when Gilgamesh comes back. This isn't the last time we'll see him. He's kind of a recurring character, like I said, in other Final Fantasy games as well, so we'll see him come back with some of the weapons in later games as well. But in this game, he does enjoy running away from you after combat. You might have noticed there when Avros went to steal from Gilgamesh as well, that it came up nothing to steal. Part of the reason why I did that there is there's a specific... Oh, here we go. I suppose a misjudge says Gilgamesh and decides to buff himself a bunch to fight all of us. So haste, protect, and shell. So now he's actually severely buffed against physical and magical damage and takes his attacks much sooner. His ATB gauge will be filling up much quicker. We'll be using haste and some other spells later on in the game. We don't necessarily have access to them at the moment. And then Gilgamesh resorts to Dragoon jumping here, which makes him do a lot more damage. And as you'll notice there, we're doing a lot less damage. So yeah, it makes him a lot trickier here to kill. One of the tricks is to make sure that you actually kill him before he casts these spells, or silence him so he can't cast them. I decided to go for a bit of a challenge in this run and just go for standard fight strategy against him, so part of the reason why I've been talking more about the characterization of Gilgamesh than the actual fight here is that it's pretty straightforward. Just deal damage, keep yourself healed. There's not a huge amount of strategy against Gilgamesh at this point in the game. Other than beating him before he makes his buff round here and silencing him so he can't buff himself, but alternatively using stuff like summons, which don't really care as much about shell, or other things like that will let you get through here and have a good chance of actually just defeating Gilgamesh outright. So as I was saying about Gilgamesh, he doesn't have anything to steal in this fight, because in later fights that we have against him, and in later games, he typically has a set of gear you can steal from him called Genji gear. Now, Genji gear is very strong, has very good defenses and magical defenses. In this game, it's not the best, but in some of the other games, it's incredibly good. In Final Fantasy VI, the next game, the Genji glove is actually a relic instead of armor that allows you to wield 2 weapons instead of just 1 and a shield. So Genji kind of has this mystique around it as being this incredibly potent gear. And it is very good, but, I mean, you've got better options if you want to run specific class setups, which is what we'll be doing towards the end of the game in Final Fantasy V in this run. But part of the reason why he has Genji gear is because of the story where Benkei was fighting with Yoshitsune. The Minamoto clan that Yoshitsune belonged to is also called the Genji clan, using alternate pronunciation for its kanji, Mina and Moto, as Gen and Uji, respectively. And that's sort of where this all comes from, and why Gilgamesh was the first character to really be able to provide you with the Genji gear. So, Gilgamesh just remembered he needs to take his leave, and says we'll meet again, count on it, and away he goes again. So like I said, we're going to see him show up a few more times. He's quite comedic. The first couple of appearances just have him sort of being like, don't step out of line, and haha, I was waiting behind this door for you this whole time, and needing to take his leave because he remembered he had something more important to do. And you can kind of see where this is going to go if you know some of your sort of tropes, shall we say, with the lackey character that kind of doesn't really live up to the main villain's requirements, and typically is part of their downfall, sort of thing. Not to say that Gilgamesh is exactly that, but Xdeath doesn't particularly appreciate Gilgamesh's inability to do his job and deal with the 4 warriors of light here, as we continue on the big bridge, having won our duel against Gilgamesh, and fighting the rest of the monsters on the way out here. So that's it for Gilgamesh and for the battle at the big bridge. There's only just a few more monsters here. There's a few interesting monsters. I mean, you can see there the Neo Gorilla. So Gorilla was one of like the very early game bosses in the Wells Tower for the Water Crystal. So it's interesting to see that the reskins are starting to come out really in force for some of the random mobs you fight here for bosses and stuff previously. There's not a huge amount in that regard of bosses, but it is definitely interesting to see them starting here in Galuf's world. So, having escaped the castle and Xdeath realizing the Warriors of Light have been saved by Galuf, and they're escaping on the big bridge, he activates his barrier here, which is to prevent people from getting into the castle, and the strength of the barrier from the Warriors of Light not being able to run away fast enough, and hitting them as they're crossing the big bridge, blows them away in the wind, and Krile comes back out to find where they've gone, and Galuf, Avros, Faris, and Lena, gone. Blown away with the force of the barrier there. So we resume our story after that event with them being blown far away. So now we get to explore the new world of Galuf's world, and Faris obviously asking Galuf where we are, and he reckons we're at Glossiana, back of nowhere, monsters everywhere, and like as he says, figures they'd be thrown as far away as possible from anywhere that would actually be relevant or helpful. And Avros continues his apology from earlier, and Galuf calls us a bunch of meddlesome bombs, and Avros decides, oh well, I'm gonna follow everybody else, and Galuf admits quietly to himself that he's happy to see the rest of the crew here. So we get to continue with the game here. So in the next town, another piano. So Avros has definitely gotten a lot better on those pianos as we keep playing them. So yeah, we'll get a few more pianos in before he's a virtuoso on the piano. And the crew decides to take a rest in the inn. The innkeeper actually lets us know, seeing as I don't see people very often, we get to stay for free. And Galuf gets up in the middle of the night and runs off, so Avros decides to investigate. So, trying to work out where Galuf went. It turns out he's in the pub, enjoying a quiet drink to himself, and finally gets to try the famed brew of the town Rigol that we've found our way to. And Avros can't sleep either, and Galuf tells him to pull up a chair. And Avros just can't stop apologizing for what's happening here, and Galuf admits that there was no way that they would have actually made it into Exdeath's castle in the first place, even if Avros and friends hadn't shown up, because as you saw, that barrier just blew everybody away. And Galuf wants to know why we actually came when there was no way back, and Avros says, no real reason, which is a lie. They knew they had to go and help Galuf. They had to finish what they started with Exdeath, and Galuf seems to figure that out and says everything's all okay. So, here's our first introduction to Moogles. So, Moogles are these weird... They've changed a lot in different games, but in this game they're these weird sort of white bat bears with pink pom-poms on their head. They're like a little bear-shaped creature with tiny bat wings and a pink pom-pom on their head. And as Galuf says, they're weird creatures. They're pretty timid and they don't like people, so that one saw us and decided to run away. Lena, being friend of all animals, decides we need to go and rescue it, so down we go into the hole to find it. And in this cave, we kind of wander into this water and get swept along until we get to the end after a few fights in a few areas, and we find the Moogle. You can see there's little wings on its back being antagonized by what appears to be a skeleton, only for it to turn out to be a Tyrannosaurus skeleton, not just like a human skeleton like it looked like on the overworld screen there. And you'll notice here with this fight that we're throwing Phoenix Downs, the revival item, at the Tyrannosaurus, and this is why. It instant kills undead. Pretty much potions and healing magic deal damage against undead instead of healing. There's a item we'll pick up later called the Bone Mail, that when we have it and you wear it, it changes your type to undead, so you can't be healed, but poison magic heals you, so stuff like bio and other things that inflict poison actually cause healing instead of damage. And you can't be revived, because Phoenix Downs are an instant kill when you're undead. So even if you're wearing the bone mail that makes you undead and you die, you still count as an undead, so a Phoenix Down doesn't revive you. So yeah, that boss fight there would actually be tricky if it wasn't for the fact that you can just instant kill the Tyrannosaurus. So the Moogle finally warms up to the party, wanders onto the desert here on the overworld, and shakes its head saying, "Don't go in the desert." I mean, you can. There's just difficult fights in there that it's not really worth bothering with at this stage of the game. So the Moogle then shows you a path over here into the forest and then disappears. We'll find out where that path goes in the next episode. This one's a bit long with all the explanation of Gilgamesh I gave, so hope you enjoyed all of that. And as our party takes a respite here in their tent to get all their health and mana back after that long trek through the caves and out here to the desert, then I hope you'll join us for the next episode while we go and see what's going on with the Moogle. So thank you all for watching, and catch you in the next episode.